The Storm and the Stairs. The year was 1889. The winter that swallowed whole towns and tested the faith of every soul that tried to survive it. In the northern frontier, where the wind never stopped screaming and snow lay thick as judgment, life was ruled by two forces: the relentless cold, and the even colder hearts of those who believed their virtue made them righteous. In the middle of this merciless land stood the small town of Everfield, a cluster of wooden buildings and weary faces. Smoke from a dozen chimneys curled into the gray sky, and the streets were lined with ice so hard that even wagon wheels dared not protest. To survive here, people depended on one another. But to belong, that was something else entirely. And for Mary Him, belonging had always been a fragile, uncertain thing. She was 21, with hair the color of chestnuts after rain, and a gaze that carried both defiance and sadness. Her father owned the only general store in Everfield, a cramped but vital place where everyone came to trade flour, salt, and the latest rumors. Mary worked behind the counter every day, her gloved hands sorting ledgers and measuring grain while enduring the sideways looks of townsfolk who thought they knew her better than they did. They whispered that she was too proud, too bold, too opinionated for a woman. Others said she was too close to the rough men who came to trade, her virtue questionable simply because she refused to bow her head when spoken to. In a town where reputation was more valuable than gold, those whispers could wound deeper than frostbite. Her father, Samuel Him, was a good man, decent, quiet, but weary. He'd been widowed 5 years earlier and had done his best to raise Mary while keeping his business afloat. But he was no match for the power of gossip. And gossip in Everfield was a storm that never ran out of breath. That morning, as the wind picked up outside and the wooden door shuddered on its hinges, Mary stood behind the counter, adjusting a crate of canned goods. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of escape. She dreamed of the city, of somewhere far beyond the reach of these judging eyes. Maybe she'd open her own store. Maybe she'd teach. Maybe she'd finally breathe without feeling the weight of other people's opinions pressing down like snow on a weak roof. But reality snapped back as soon as the door opened. 2 men stumbled in, stamping the snow from their boots. Both were trappers and rough, unshaven, their coats stiff with frost. One of them, Eli Burns, had a grin that never reached his eyes. He tipped his hat lazily and drawled, "Mornin', Miss Him. Cold out there, ain't it? Thought we'd stop in for some warmth and some company." Mary's jaw tightened. "The fire's by the stove. Feel free to warm yourselves there." Eli laughed, glancing toward his friend. She's all business, this one. You ever smile, Miss Him? You might melt a little snow with that." Before she could respond, her father's voice came from the back room, steady but tired. "Eli, get what you came for and be on your way. We don't want no trouble today." The men chuckled, but they obeyed, gathering supplies while tossing glances toward Mary. The moment they left, she exhaled, her shoulders sinking. It was always like this. Small indignities that built up like layers of ice until she could barely feel herself beneath them. The bell above the door jingled again, this time followed by a cold gust of wind and the entrance of Mrs. Mayfield, the pastor's wife. Her eyes swept the room like a hawk surveying prey. "Morning, Mrs. Mayfield," Mary greeted politely. The older woman sniffed. "Morning. I see you're still working behind the counter instead of preparing for the Sunday choir. A woman's place is with the church, not serving men who reek of liquor and sin." Mary's fingers stilled over the ledger. "I help my father where I'm needed. The store keeps us fed." Mrs. Mayfield's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Be careful, dear. People talk. They say your father's store has become a den for men with no morals. A young woman's reputation is a fragile thing." Mary's voice dropped, cold and steady. "If people have time to gossip, maybe they should find work instead." The woman's eyes flashed. "Such disrespect. It's no wonder no decent man has asked for your hand." The word stung, but Mary refused to show it. She met the woman's gaze evenly. "Perhaps I'm not waiting for a decent man to give me worth. I can make my own." Mrs. Mayfield's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Pride, my dear, comes before the fall." She turned sharply and left, leaving the door swinging behind her. Mary stood still for a long moment. Her father appeared from the back, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd heard enough. "You shouldn't provoke them," he said quietly. "They already have their stories. Don't give them more." I'm tired of staying quiet while they drag my name through the dirt, she snapped, her voice trembling with contained emotion. I've done nothing wrong, he sighed heavily. Doing nothing wrong doesn't matter when people decide what's right for you. That was Everfield's truth. The law of whispers. The unspoken rule that a woman's value was not her work, or her kindness, or her endurance. It was how well she fit the mold others built for her. As the afternoon wore on, the wind turned crueler. Clouds gathered low and gray, thick as smoke. The first flakes began to fall, and soft, hesitant at first, then faster, fiercer. By sunset, a storm had swallowed the town whole. Inside the store, the windows rattled, and Mary shivered beside the stove. It's getting worse, she murmured. We should close early, her father nodded. I'll finish counting the day's sales. You lock up. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside to bring in the last of the supplies from the porch. The snow stung her face sharp as tiny needles. As she turned to go back inside, she saw the outline of a man through the swirling white. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose through the storm. At first, she thought it was one of the trappers returning, but as he drew closer, she saw he was alone, wrapped in a heavy coat of furs, his face half hidden under a hood. He didn't head toward the store. Instead, he passed by silent, carrying what looked like a bundle of wood and a rifle slung over his back. His boots made deep, slow prints in the snow. Something about him, his steadiness in the storm, his quiet strength, made her pause. For a moment, their eyes met through the blur of snow. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white. Cabin, she would later learn, was his name. A man who lived alone in the woods far from the town's prying eyes. People whispered about him too, that he was wild, dangerous, godless. Some said he'd killed a man. Others claimed he'd saved lives in the war. But no one really knew because no one ever asked. That night, as the storm raged and the shutters banged against the walls, Mary sat by her small window, staring into the darkness. The wind howled like a living thing and the snow piled higher with every hour. Something inside her felt restless, a quiet voice whispering that the world she knew was about to change. By morning, the town was buried. Paths were lost beneath drifts taller than fences. The trading post door was frozen shut. Mary helped her father shovel their way out, her breath clouding the air. Stay inside after dark, he warned. The roads will kill you before the cold does. But by mid-afternoon, he fell ill, fevered, his breath shallow. Mary tried to fetch the doctor, only to find his home cut off by the snow. She was desperate. The storm was easing slightly, but night was near. If she didn't act now, her father might not last until morning. She bundled herself in every layer she owned, tied her cloak tight, and set out toward the next settlement. A half-day's walk even in good weather. The sky was bruised and low, and the wind still bit at her face. She walked for hours, her boots sinking deep, her legs trembling from exhaustion. The trees closed around her like dark sentinels. She looked back once, and the town was already gone, erased by white. Panic clawed at her chest, but she pressed on. Then came the sound, the groan of ice beneath her feet. She froze. Another step and the ground cracked like thunder. The creek beneath the snow gave way, and she plunged knee-deep into freezing water. A cry tore from her throat as she scrambled to crawl free, her skirt heavy, her hands burning from the cold. She dragged herself onto the bank, but the damage was done. Her ankle twisted, her limbs stiffening fast. The wind rose again, cruel and merciless. The world blurred into endless white. She tried to move, but her body no longer obeyed. Her last thought before the darkness closed in was her father, and the stranger she'd seen walking into the storm. Hours later, the same wind battered a lonely cabin deep in the woods. Inside, Cabin was adding a log to his fire when he heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the storm. A cry. He stilled, listening. It came again, weaker this time. He grabbed his lantern and coat, stepped into the blizzard and followed the sound. The snow was waist-deep, the air so cold it burned his lungs. But he pressed on until he saw a shape half buried near the frozen creek. He knelt, brushing snow from her face. Her lips were blue, her lashes crusted with ice. She wasn't dead, not yet. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, frighteningly light, her head resting against his chest as he trudged back toward his cabin. Every step was a battle, but he didn't stop. Inside, he laid her by the fire, stripped off her wet cloak, and wrapped her in blankets. He rubbed her hands, her arms, willing warmth back into her. Stay with me, he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Don't you give up now. For hours he worked, feeding her spoonfuls of warm broth, checking her breathing, adding wood to the fire. Slowly her color began to return. By dawn she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then wide with confusion and fear. Where am I? She whispered. In my cabin, he said simply. You were dying out there. Her mind struggled to piece it together. The storm, my father. I was trying to rest, he said, his voice low, calm. You're safe now. She looked around, the small, rugged space, the rough-hewn furniture, the fire crackling bright. Then she looked back at him. A man with a beard thick from the cold, eyes like storm clouds, hands scarred from labor. A man she didn't know. A man she was now alone with. Panic flickered in her chest. I need to leave, she said quickly, trying to sit up. If people find out I was here, you step outside in that snow, you won't make it a mile, he said quietly. You'll leave when it's safe, not before. Their eyes met. The silence between them heavy with tension neither of them understood. Finally, she sank back against the pillow, trembling. Thank you, she whispered. Cabin only nodded, turning back to the fire. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, two strangers sat in uneasy silence, bound together by fate and by the cruel laws of a world that would never understand mercy without judgment. What neither of them knew was that this single act of kindness, this rescue born from instinct, would soon become the spark that set their lives ablaze with scandal, sacrifice, and an unexpected kind of love. Because in Everfield, appearances mattered more than truth, and saving a woman's life could still destroy her name. Morning broke over the frozen wilderness with a pale, merciless light. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world blanketed in endless white. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned low, its embers whispering softly. Mary stirred beneath the blankets, her body sore, her throat dry, and her mind heavy with confusion. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The low timber ceiling, the scent of pine smoke, the distant crackle of firewood, it felt like a dream. But then she turned her head and saw Cabin sitting in a chair near the hearth, sharpening a knife with slow, steady movements. The sound of metal against stone echoed softly in the room. Reality rushed back. The storm, the ice, the man who had found her. The fact that she was here alone with him. She sat up suddenly, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The movement startled him. His eyes flicked up, calm but cautious. You shouldn't move too fast, he said quietly. His voice was low and rough, like gravel softened by years of silence. You've been asleep near 2 days. 2 days? Her voice cracked in disbelief. My father, he must be worried sick. I have to go back. Cabin set down the knife and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. If you go out there now, you'll freeze before you make it halfway to town. The snow's still too deep. You stay here until it melts enough to walk. Mary's heart pounded. People will talk if they find out I was here. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Would you rather they talk over your grave? The bluntness of his words silenced her. She looked away, the tension in her chest thickening. I'm not ungrateful, she murmured. You saved my life. But you don't understand what this means for me. For a woman? Cabin gave a faint, humorless smile. No, I suppose I don't. I stopped worrying about what people think a long time ago. He stood and crossed to the fire, tossing another log into the flames. The light flickered across his face, revealing the deep lines around his eyes. You should eat, he said simply. I made stew. Mary hesitated, her stomach twisting with hunger and unease. She didn't want to accept his hospitality, but she had no strength left to argue. She ate in silence, the warmth of the food slowly chasing the chill from her bones. Cabin said little. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking traps, fetching water, feeding the fire. It was clear he was used to solitude. Everything he did had purpose. When she finally spoke again, it was almost a whisper. Why do you live out here alone? He didn't answer right away. People have a way of turning truth into poison, he said finally. Out here I can breathe. Mary studied him carefully. His words carried weight. There was a sadness in them she recognized, the same kind that had settled in her own heart since her mother's passing. For a fleeting moment she felt a strange kinship with him. Two outcasts, trapped by the same judgmental world, though for different reasons. By the third day, the snow had begun to ease. Cabin helped her stand and test her ankle. The pain had dulled, but every step was still a struggle. You can make it back by morning if we leave at first light, he said. I'll take you home. She nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her. She already knew what the people of Everfield would say when they saw her returning with a man like him. She'd heard their cruel whispers her entire life. Now they'd have proof to twist into whatever story they pleased. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the fire's glow. Cabin sat near the window, whittling a piece of wood in silence. The rhythmic sound of his knife was oddly comforting. Do you regret saving me? She asked suddenly. His hands paused. He looked up, surprised by the question. No, a person in need deserves help, whether they thank you for it or not. Mary's eyes softened. I do thank you, more than I can say. He gave a slight nod, then turned back to his carving. Outside, the forest was still. The world for once seemed at peace. But the peace was an illusion, fragile as frost. By sunrise, they were on their way back. The snow crunched under their boots as they moved through the forest, the cold air biting at their faces. Cabin carried her satchel and kept a steady pace beside her, offering his arm whenever her ankle faltered. It took hours before the outline of Everfield appeared through the trees, smoke curling from chimneys, the church steeple piercing the gray sky. Mary's stomach clenched as they approached. They hadn't even reached the main street before the first eyes turned toward them. A man paused at his wagon, watching with raised brows. Two women outside the bakery stopped mid-conversation, their faces twisting with barely contained judgment. Whispers followed them like shadows. Is that marry him? With him? Lord have mercy, she spent the storm out there? By the time they reached the trading post, the entire street was buzzing. Mary's father burst through the door, his expression torn between relief and disbelief. Mary, he cried, rushing forward to embrace her. Lord, I thought I'd lost you. She clung to him, tears spilling down her cheeks. I got caught in the storm. I would have died if he hadn't found me. She turned to Cabin, who stood quietly near the door, his hat in his hands. He saved my life. Samuel's eyes flicked toward the man. You have my thanks, sir. Cabin nodded once. No thanks needed. He turned to leave, but before he could step outside, Mrs. Mayfield appeared at the threshold, her eyes wide with self-righteous glee. Well, would you look at that? She said, her voice ringing across the room. The girl goes missing for 2 days, and now she comes back from his cabin. A murmur swept through the store. Mary froze. Her father's hand tightened on her shoulder. Now hold on, Mrs. Mayfield. Oh, save your excuses, the woman snapped. We all know what it looks like. A young woman alone with a man in the wilderness for days. There's only one way to make that right in the eyes of God in this town. Mary's face went pale. That's not true. Nothing happened. Mrs. Mayfield's eyes gleamed. You expect us to believe that? He's an outcast and now you're... Well, I suppose that makes two of you. The room filled with murmurs and judgmental stares. Mary's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to explain, but she knew it wouldn't matter. In Everfield, once a story took root, it grew like wildfire. Her father looked at her with anguish in his eyes. They'll ruin you, he whispered. You'll never have peace here. Cabin stood silently, his jaw set. She did nothing wrong, he said evenly. She was hurt. I found her. That's all. Doesn't matter, someone muttered from the crowd. We all know what happens when a man and a woman share a cabin overnight. Mary felt the world closing in. Shame, anger, fear, they all collided in her chest. The pastor stepped forward, his face solemn. There's one way to preserve her name, he said. A proper marriage. It's the only honorable path. The word struck her like a physical blow. Marriage? She whispered. To him? Her father's voice broke. Mary, I don't see another way. This town won't forgive. Cabin looked at her then, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and steady. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, If it saves her name, I'll do it. Mary turned toward him, disbelief flooding her. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said simply. You didn't deserve this. The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Mayfield seemed momentarily taken aback by his calm. Mary shook her head, tears welling. This isn't fair. I didn't choose this. Her father's voice trembled. Sometimes life doesn't give us choices, only chances to survive the consequences. The pastor cleared his throat. We'll hold the ceremony tomorrow. It will be simple. The crowd began to disperse, whispering, some shaking their heads, others smirking behind their hands. The damage was done. When the door finally closed, Mary stood frozen in the middle of the store, her breath coming shallow and fast. Cabin stood by the door, silent as always. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked bitterly. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because they would have destroyed you if I hadn't." Her voice trembled. "And what about you? Won't they just say you trapped me?" "They already do," he said simply. "Words don't change who I am." For a long moment, they stared at each other. The woman who'd lost everything, and the man who'd saved her only to be condemned for it. The silence between them said what neither could. The next day, the church was filled, not with joy or celebration, but with curiosity and judgment. The townspeople crowded into the wooden pews, whispering behind gloved hands. Mary stood at the front, dressed in a borrowed gown that hung loose around her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she held a small bouquet of frostbitten flowers. Cabin stood beside her, wearing a clean shirt and a coat that didn't quite fit. He looked uncomfortable but calm. The pastor's voice droned through the vows, each word feeling heavier than the last. When it came time to answer, Mary hesitated, her throat dry. Then softly she said, "I do." Cabin's response was steady, certain. "I do." And just like that, it was done. The ring was a simple band of brass. The kiss barely a brush of air. Yet the sound of the townsfolk's whispers filled the room louder than the pastor's. Blessing, such a pity. She had potential. He's ruined her. Maybe it's what she deserved. When it was over, they stepped outside into the biting wind. The snow crunched beneath their boots. The sky was gray again. Mary stared out over the white fields that surrounded the town, feeling both trapped and free in the same breath. She turned to Cabin, her voice soft. "What happens now?" He looked at her, then toward the forest beyond. "Now," he said quietly, "you come home." That night, as they rode toward the woods, the cabin that had once been a place of rescue now becoming her new home, Mary couldn't help but look back at the town lights fading behind her. Each flicker of lantern felt like a piece of her old life vanishing into the dark. She didn't know what waited for her out there, but she knew this much: whatever came next, it would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning of something entirely different. The road back to the woods was quieter than any place Mary had ever known. Only the wind dared to speak, curling through the pines, sighing over the snow, whispering secrets between the trees. She rode behind Cabin on his old bay horse, her gloved hands gripping his coat for balance. The silence between them wasn't awkward, just heavy, filled with the weight of everything neither could say. By the time they reached the clearing, dusk had fallen. The cabin stood where she had first seen it, a lonely shape against the silver frost, smoke rising from the chimney like a thin, uncertain promise. Cabin dismounted first, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His touch was steady, warm even through the cold. "This is home now," he said quietly. The word home hit her harder than she expected, not because it was comforting, but because it didn't feel true. Not yet. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room, a small hearth, a table, a narrow bed pushed against the wall. Everything was clean but plain. There was only one chair, one cup, one life here. And now she was part of it. Cabin set down his coat and began to stir the fire. "There's stew left from this morning," he said. "You should eat." Mary stood by the door, her hands clasped. "Where will I sleep?" He paused. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." She blinked, surprised. "You don't have to." "It's your right," he said simply. "You're my wife now, whether either of us wanted it or not." The words hung in the air, honest but not cruel. Mary looked away. She felt the ring on her finger like a shackle, a reminder of the life she'd been forced into. That night, as the wind howled outside, she lay awake listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing near the fire. She thought of her father, of the town, of how easily the truth had been swallowed by lies. She thought of Cabin, too, the man who'd saved her, who'd given her his home, who'd taken the punishment meant for her. Somewhere in her chest, confusion bloomed into something else, something she didn't yet want to name. Days passed, and slowly a rhythm formed. Cabin chopped wood each morning, his axe echoing through the still forest. Mary cooked, cleaned, and tried to make the cabin feel less like a prison and more like a place she could breathe. He rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, his words carried quiet weight. "Don't walk past the creek," he warned one afternoon as she gathered snow for water. "The ground gives way there." Another day he brought her a bundle of rabbit pelts. "Trade these when spring comes," he said. "They'll fetch good coin." She began to see the man behind the silence, someone deliberate, careful and deeply lonely, and in that loneliness, she found an echo of herself. One evening, while she was mending one of his shirts, she asked, "Did you ever have a family before this?" Cabin's hand stilled on the piece of wood he'd been carving. For a long time he didn't answer. Then quietly, once, she waited. "They're gone now." Her needle froze. "I'm sorry." He looked at the fire, eyes distant. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But the way his jaw tightened told her the wound was not as old as he claimed. Weeks passed. The snow began to melt in patches and the forest came alive again. Birds returned, rivers thawed, and the days grew longer. With the change of season came something else, a sense that Mary was beginning to belong, at least to the land. She learned to set traps, to bake bread on the fire, to gather herbs that Cabin taught her to find. They rarely spoke of the town. But news had a way of traveling even through the trees. One afternoon, a rider appeared, a young boy from Everfield, bringing supplies from her father. He handed Mary a small letter and a bag of sugar. Cabin kept his distance as she read the letter by the door. Her father's handwriting trembled across the page. "My dear Mary, the town hasn't been kind, but time may soften them. I pray you are safe. I hope he treats you well. Some say you were lucky to find such a man. Others say it was punishment. I no longer know what to believe, only that I miss you. Your loving father, Samuel." Her hands shook as she folded the paper. When she looked up, Cabin was watching her with that same calm stillness. "You can visit him," he said. "I won't stop you," she hesitated. "Would they even let me in the church?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. That night she stood outside the cabin, watching the stars. The air was cold, crisp, alive with the scent of pine and melting snow. Cabin joined her silently. For a while they just stood there side by side, the distance between them shrinking in the quiet. "You don't have to stay out here forever," he said finally. She glanced at him. "Where else would I go?" He looked toward the horizon, toward the town maybe, or beyond it. "Anywhere you want." "I didn't marry you to keep you." She swallowed hard. "Then why did you?" He met her eyes. "Because no one else would have done what was right." His words struck her, not because they were noble, but because they were true. He hadn't claimed her out of desire or pity, but out of duty. And yet, somehow, that made it worse. Before she could respond, a howl echoed through the forest, and sharp, close. Cabin stiffened. "Get inside," he said quickly. "What is it?" "Wolf." He grabbed his rifle and moved toward the edge of the clearing. Mary stayed at the door, her heart racing. She could see the dark shapes moving just beyond the firelight, eyes glinting in the night. Cabin fired once. The echo shattered the silence. The wolves scattered, their cries fading into the trees. When he returned, his face was calm, but his hands trembled slightly as he reloaded the rifle. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but they'll be back. Hunger makes them bold." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You could have been killed." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Would you have cared?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she said without hesitation. For the first time, his expression softened. Something unspoken passed between them. A fragile understanding. A spark of something neither of them had expected. Days later, she found the wooden carving he'd been working on for weeks. It was a bird, small, delicate, wings unfurled as if ready to take flight. On the bottom, he had carved a single word: freedom. When she asked him about it, he just smiled faintly. "It's what everyone wants, even if they don't admit it." She held it in her palm, the smooth wood warm from his touch. "Do you think we'll ever have it?" Cabin looked out toward the trees. "Not if we keep looking for it in other people's eyes." Spring came in full, painting the forest in color and life. But peace was short-lived. One morning, Cabin returned from town with a dark expression. He said little during breakfast, his eyes fixed on the table. Mary felt the unease immediately. "What happened?" He hesitated. Someone's been asking questions. About me? About you? He nodded. A man from the sheriff's office. Her pulse quickened. Why? Cabin's jaw tightened. They say there was a fire years ago. Out west, a man died. They think I had something to do with it. She froze. Did you? He didn't answer right away. It was an accident, he said finally. But accidents don't matter much to people who want someone to blame. Mary felt a chill crawl up her spine. And now they've found you. He met her eyes steady and grim. Maybe, which means you need to be ready. If they come here asking, you don't know anything. Her heart ached at the quiet urgency in his voice. Cabin? Is that why you live out here alone? He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried. Not just loneliness, but guilt. I came here to start over, he said softly. But you can't outrun the past forever. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words the way he'd looked at her, like a man who had already accepted his fate. The wind moaned outside, and she realized something. For the first time since she'd met him, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. She rose quietly, crossing the small room to where he sat half asleep by the fire. If they come, she whispered, I'll tell them nothing. I promise. He looked up, startled by the resolve in her voice. Then he nodded slowly. You shouldn't have to bear that. Neither should you, she said. Their eyes met. Two souls bound not by choice but by circumstance, finding a strange kind of loyalty in the ashes of their misfortune. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Another storm was coming, but this time they wouldn't face it as strangers. The storm arrived before dawn. Rain lashed against the roof in angry sheets. Wind rattled the shutters, and the fire burned low in the hearth, fighting to stay alive. Mary woke to the sound of thunder, deep, rumbling, and endless. Cabin was already up. He stood near the door, his rifle leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on the gray light seeping through the cracks. His shoulders were tense, the way a man looks when he's listening for trouble. What is it? She asked sleepily, clutching the blanket around her. He didn't turn. Horses, 2 of them. Headed this way. Her blood ran cold. From town? He nodded once. Mary sat up fully now, her heart beat loud in her ears. Cabin, is it the sheriff? He glanced back at her, a brief look, steady and calm despite the tension. Maybe, or someone who thinks I owe them something. Before she could reply, a knock thundered on the cabin door. Cabin opened it slowly. 2 men stood on the porch, dripping rain, both armed. One wore a long brown coat and a sheriff's badge glinting beneath it. The other, younger, held a wanted poster in his hand. Morning, the sheriff said, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was calm, polite, but cold. Sorry to intrude. You must be Caleb Ward. Cabin's eyes narrowed slightly. Folks call me Cabin. The sheriff nodded as though he'd expected that. We've been looking for you a long time. Mary felt her stomach twist. She stepped closer, but the sheriff's gaze shifted to her, sharp and appraising. And you must be his wife. Mary swallowed. Yes. The sheriff's tone softened slightly, though his eyes didn't. Ma'am, this won't take long. We're here about a fire that happened 6 years ago, out near the Black Hollow settlement. You might have heard of it. She shook her head, her hands trembling. Cabin said nothing. The silence stretched. Finally, the sheriff pulled the folded paper from his coat. The same poster the young deputy had been holding. Name was Caleb Ward, he read. Suspected in the death of a man named Raymond Holt. Cabin was his nickname, wasn't it? Always preferred the woods to people. The younger deputy smirked faintly. Guess that part was true. Cabin didn't flinch. Holt was my partner, he said quietly. We built houses together. The fire wasn't my doing. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. That's not what the witnesses said. They saw you arguing. Then Holt's cabin went up in flames the same night. Cabin's voice dropped to a low murmur. We argued, yes, but it wasn't about money or land. It was about mercy. Mary frowned, confused. Mercy? Cabin finally turned toward her, his eyes dark with memory. Raymond was sick, dying slow. He begged me to end it. I couldn't do it, Mary, I wouldn't. But that night, he took the lantern himself. I tried to stop him. He paused, jaw tightening. The fire spread too fast. By the time I pulled him out, it was too late. No one believed me after that. They said I burned him for his land. The sheriff's expression softened slightly, but not enough. That's a good story. But we'll need proof. Cabin stepped aside. Then take me. I've got nothing left to hide. Cabin, no. Mary's voice cracked. She stepped forward, gripping his arm. You can't just go with them. They'll hang you before they listen. He looked down at her, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Sad, weary, but resolute. Maybe that's what I deserve. The sheriff watched them in silence for a long moment. Then he sighed. You've been living quiet all this time, not causing trouble. That counts for something. He took a step closer. We'll head back to town in the morning. If your story holds, you'll have a chance to clear your name. Cabin nodded. I'll be ready. When the men left to set up camp outside, Mary stood by the fire, trembling. The storm still howled outside, but the real one was inside her chest. You can't go, she whispered again, tears welling. They don't care about truth, Cabin. They care about someone to blame. He met her gaze quietly. You think I don't know that? Then why go? She cried. Why give them what they want? Because running only proves them right, he said. And I'm tired of running. She turned away, tears spilling down her cheeks. You saved me, Cabin. And now you're going to throw your life away? He took a slow step toward her. If I hadn't found you that night, I'd still be a ghost. You gave me something I thought I'd lost, reason. Maybe this is how I earn it back. The night dragged on, heavy and endless. Mary couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the wooden carving of the bird, the one he'd made, wings outstretched, carved with the word, freedom. Freedom. The one thing neither of them had ever truly known. Her fingers closed around it as thunder boomed outside. And then, through the noise of the storm, she heard voices, outside the window, low, harsh, hurried. She crept to the door and peered through a crack. The sheriff and his deputy were arguing. You said he'd come quietly, the deputy hissed. Why wait? Let's take him now. The sheriff's voice was sharp. We do this by the book. By the book? The deputy spat. He's a murderer, Sheriff. Holt's family offered a bounty. You really think they'll care how clean it looks? Mary's heart dropped. A bounty. That changed everything. She stumbled back from the door, her breath quick and shallow. Cabin stirred from his chair, sensing her panic. What is it? They're not here to clear your name, she whispered. They're here to collect it. Cabin was on his feet instantly. How do you know? I heard them. They're waiting till you're asleep. His eyes darkened. Then we don't wait for them. He moved quickly, packing what little they owned, throwing a coat over her shoulders, dousing the fire. The rain had eased slightly, but the night was still thick with fog and danger. They slipped out the back door, boots sinking into the mud. The forest loomed around them, black and endless. Mary's hand found his, trembling. Where are we going? North, he whispered. There's an old mining trail that leads through the ridge. If we can make it by sunrise, they'll lose the tracks. But they didn't get far before the shout came. Stop! Cabin ward, you're under arrest. A gunshot tore through the night. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Mary's head. Cabin pushed her behind him, raising his rifle. Run! I'm not leaving you, she cried. Mary, go! Another shot rang out, closer this time. Cabin returned fire, his eyes fierce and focused. The woods erupted in chaos, rain, shouting, smoke. Then silence. When Mary dared to move, Cabin was on one knee, clutching his arm. Blood seeped through his sleeve. Cabin. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking. It's fine, he muttered, trying to stand. Just a scratch. But his face was pale, his breath shallow. In the distance, the sheriff's voice called out again. Cabin, don't make this worse than it has to be. Mary looked at him, really looked, and something inside her snapped. They'll kill you, she whispered. They'll kill us both. He met her gaze, weary but calm. Then we make sure it means something. She nodded, tears blurring her vision. Then I'm not leaving you. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, thunder cracked overhead again, and the forest was swallowed in light and sound. When it cleared, they were gone. Hours later, the sheriff and his deputy reached the ridge. The rain had washed away most of the tracks. Only one thing remained, a wooden carving lying in the mud. A bird, wings spread wide, carved with a single word. Freedom. The sheriff picked it up slowly, staring at it in silence. Then he turned to his deputy. Call off the search, he said. They've earned it. The dawn that followed was cold and gray, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy, where the light never quite reaches the ground. Mary's breath came in ragged bursts as she followed Cabin through the forest. The rain had stopped, but the fog still clung to the trees like smoke. Every sound, every snapped twig, every distant crow made her flinch. Cabin's shirt sleeve was soaked with blood. The wound on his arm had stopped bleeding, but the skin was pale beneath the dirt. Still he pressed forward, his steps steady, his will unbroken. "Cabin, you need to rest," Mary pleaded, her voice hoarse. He shook his head. "Not yet. They'll be searching the ridge by now." She swallowed her panic, clutching the strap of the small satchel slung over her shoulder. Inside was all they had: a bit of bread, a knife, a small water flask, and the wooden carving of the bird. Each mile they put between them and Everfield felt like another strand of her old life breaking away. She was no longer the merchant's daughter, the woman whispered about in church pews. She was the fugitive's wife, bound to a man the world believed a killer, and for the first time she wasn't sure she minded. By midday, the fog began to thin. They stopped near a stream to drink. Cabin sank to one knee, splashing cold water over his wound, gritting his teeth against the sting. Mary knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her dress to bind his arm. Her fingers trembled as she worked, but her voice was firm. "You're burning up," she said. "You can't keep going like this." Cabin gave a faint, humorless smile. "You sound like my mother." She shot him a look. "If your mother were here, she'd tell you to sit still." He chuckled softly, the first time she'd heard that sound in days. It was low and rough like gravel underfoot, but it warmed her somehow. When she finished wrapping his arm, she sat back, watching him. His eyes were half closed, his breath slow. "Cabin," she said quietly, "if they catch us, they won't. But if they do," she hesitated, then met his gaze. "What will they do to me?" He frowned. "You didn't do anything." "I ran," she said. "I helped you." "That's enough for them." Cabin's jaw tightened. "Then I'll take the blame for both of us." She shook her head. "No, we stand or fall together." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her not as someone he'd saved, not as someone he'd been forced to marry, but as his equal. Something in his expression softened. "You're stronger than you know, Mary." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You made me that way." They pressed on through the forest until dusk. The trees began to thin, revealing a stretch of rocky hills ahead. Beyond that lay the northern plains and a place Cabin had only heard about in old maps and trading tales. "There's a cabin up there," he said. "Old Hunter's place. Abandoned years ago. We can stay there a few nights." By the time they reached it, the sun had disappeared completely. The building was barely standing. One wall caved in, the roof sagging, but it was shelter. Cabin dropped the pack and collapsed near the cold hearth. Mary knelt beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're burning again," she whispered. "I need to find something to bring the fever down." "Don't go far," he murmured. Eyes already closing, she stepped outside, gathering snow and a few herbs she remembered from the cabin's garden back home. Ones Cabin had taught her could soothe fever. When she returned, she found him half asleep, muttering something under his breath. "Cabin," she said softly. "You're safe. I'm here." His eyes fluttered open, dazed. "Did he get out?" She frowned. "Who?" He blinked slowly as if seeing ghosts. "Raymond. The night of the fire." His voice broke. "He begged me to let him go. I couldn't. I tried to pull him out, but the roof—" He stopped, his breathing shallow. Mary took his hand. "You did what you could." He shook his head. "No, I did what I thought was right. And right doesn't always save people." Her eyes glistened. "It saved me." For a long time neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, and outside the wind moaned through the broken boards. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Cabin's fever broke slowly. Mary hunted rabbits with the old bow they'd found in the cabin. She boiled herbs, patched the roof, and kept watch from the window each night, praying she wouldn't see torchlight in the distance. But the fear never left her. It clung to her chest like a shadow. One night as they sat by the fire, Cabin finally spoke. "You could leave, you know." Mary frowned. "Leave?" He nodded. "Go north to the settlements. Tell them your husband died in the storm. You'd be free." Her heart twisted. "Free?" She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I haven't been free since the day the snow took me." He looked at her, puzzled. She met his gaze, her voice trembling. "You saved my life, Cabin. Then the town took my name, my reputation, my choices." "And you—" She swallowed. You gave me back a kind of life they could never understand. I won't walk away from that. He stared into the fire for a long moment, then said quietly, You deserve more than a man running from ghosts. She smiled faintly. Then stop running. Outside snow began to fall again, soft, silent, endless. They stayed in that old cabin for weeks, living on what they could hunt, speaking little but saying everything through small gestures, a shared glance, a hand brushed in passing, a bowl of soup placed by the fire, and slowly, something unspoken began to bloom between them. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper, forged through survival, through fire and frost and fear. One morning, she woke to find him sitting outside, sharpening his knife. The snow was still falling, and the air shimmered with pale light. He looked up as she stepped out. You should stay inside. It's cold. She wrapped her shawl tighter. You're bleeding again. He glanced down at his hand, the small cut from the knife. Just a scratch. She took his hand anyway, wrapping it gently. You always say that, he chuckled softly. You always worry too much, she smiled. Then we're even. That afternoon, while Cabin fixed the roof, Mary wandered down to the stream. The ice had melted enough to show the water beneath, clear, running, alive. As she filled the flask, she noticed footprints in the mud, not theirs. Her breath caught. She crouched down. The tracks were deep, recent, and there were more than one set. Someone had been here. She dropped the flask and ran back to the cabin. Cabin! He turned instantly, alert. What is it? Tracks, down by the stream. 2 men. His expression darkened. How fresh? An hour, maybe less. He grabbed his rifle, checking the chamber. They found us. By nightfall, they'd packed again. Quietly, efficiently, hearts pounding with the rhythm of escape. As they left the cabin behind, Mary looked back once. Through the falling snow, she saw the faint glow of torchlight on the ridge. Cabin, she whispered. They're close, he gripped her hand. Then we move faster. The forest swallowed them again, 2 shadows against the storm. Back in Everfield, Sheriff Harlan sat in his office, staring at the small wooden carving on his desk, the one he'd found in the mud. The word freedom was still clear beneath the grime. He turned it over in his hands, lost in thought. His deputy burst through the door. Sheriff, we found tracks near the ridge. They're headed north. Harlan looked up slowly. And? The deputy grinned. Orders? The sheriff sighed, setting the carving down carefully. We leave them. What? Why? Because maybe, Harlan said quietly. Some people deserve to start over. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. And maybe freedom's not something we're meant to take from others, just something we learn to let them keep. The wind was sharp that morning, the kind that cut through coats and skin and memory alike. Mary woke to the sound of cabins splitting wood outside their makeshift camp. They had been traveling north for nearly 2 weeks, living off whatever they could trap or find. The land was colder now, wilder, untouched by towns or lawmen. But peace had a strange way of turning quiet into suspicion. The tracks that had followed them since the ridge were gone, or so Cabin hoped. Still, he never slept long. His eyes would open at the slightest sound. His hand always rested near the rifle. Mary had stopped asking if he was afraid. She knew he wasn't. He was waiting, not for the sheriff, but for something older. Something that had been chasing him since the night of the fire. That afternoon, the sky darkened again. A blizzard was rolling in fast. They found shelter in an old mining outpost, a cluster of half-collapsed shacks buried beneath snow and silence. Cabin got a fire going while Mary unpacked what little food remained. Her hands were trembling as she set the pot down. You're shaking, he said quietly. It's just the cold, she lied. He studied her for a moment. No, it's not, she looked away. I keep thinking about that night. When the sheriff came, the way he looked at you, it wasn't hatred. It was pity. Cabin's jaw tightened. Pity's worse than hate. She turned to him. He didn't arrest you, Cabin, he let you go. He didn't answer. Why? She pressed. What does he know that I don't? Cabin finally looked up from the fire. His eyes were dark, haunted. Because he was there. The words hung between them, heavy as the snow pressing against the walls. Mary froze. What do you mean? He was there. Cabin took a slow breath. The night of the fire. Harlan wasn't the sheriff then, just a deputy. He and Raymond were friends. He came by that night to talk sense into him. I told him Raymond was sick, losing himself. But Harlan didn't believe me. He stared into the flames, his voice low. Raymond started shouting, accusing me of stealing his tools, his land, even his wife's affection. He was delirious. The fever had taken his mind. Then he grabbed the lantern. Cabin's hands tightened into fists. Harlan tried to stop him. I pulled him back, but Raymond fell and the lantern shattered. Fire spread faster than we could breathe. I dragged Harlan out, but Raymond... He swallowed. Raymond didn't make it. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Then why didn't Harlan tell anyone? Cabin gave a bitter laugh. Because he froze. He left me there, trying to save a man already gone. When they found the ashes the next morning, I was the only one left. He didn't speak up. Maybe guilt ate him alive, maybe fear. Either way, I took the blame. Mary covered her mouth, her heart breaking. He let them hunt you all these years? Cabin nodded. Until he saw me again, saw you. Maybe that's when he finally remembered who the real murderer was. The fire? She whispered. No, he said softly. Fear. That night the storm roared through the mountains. Snow hammered the roof, and wind howled through every crack. They huddled by the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the sound of the past outside their door. You should rest, Cabin murmured. She shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire. He looked at her, his expression gentle. The fire's over, Mary. Then why does it still burn? She asked. He didn't answer. By dawn, the storm had passed but something else was coming. Mary saw it first. Movement down the valley, small, dark figures against the snow. Cabin, she whispered. Riders. He stepped outside, squinting through the light. 3 of them. The sheriff's men. He turned back to her. We can make it to the ridge if we move now. But she was already shaking her head. No more running, he frowned. Mary, no, she said firmly. You said it yourself. Right doesn't always save people. But it has to mean something. You can't spend the rest of your life proving to ghosts that you're innocent. Cabin looked at her. This woman who once feared him, now standing like stone in the snow. Then what do you want me to do? He asked quietly. She took his hand. Face it. When the riders arrived, they found the couple standing side by side in front of the old outpost. Cabin's rifle was slung across his back, his hands empty. Sheriff Harlan dismounted first. He looked older than he had before, not in years, but in burden. Cabin, he said, his breath misting in the cold. I didn't think you'd stop. Wasn't planning to, Cabin replied. But she was. Mary stepped forward. You owe him the truth. Harlan's jaw worked, his eyes flicking between them. The truth won't change what happened. It'll change everything, Mary said. The sheriff was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. This came 2 weeks ago, he said, from Raymond Holt's sister. She found a journal among his things, pages he wrote before he died. He handed it to Cabin. You should read it. Cabin unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. If this sickness takes me, I pray no one blames Caleb. He's done all he can. If I go, let them know it was by my own hand. I can't stand the pain anymore. The fever burns hotter than any fire could. Cabin's throat closed. He couldn't speak. Harlan's voice was low. You were right. I should have told the truth years ago. I can't undo what I did, but I can stop running from it. He turned to his men. Ride back to Everfield. Tell them Caleb Ward's name is cleared. For a long time, no one spoke. The wind was the only sound between them. Mary stepped closer to Cabin, slipping her hand into his. He looked at her, eyes glistening, then back at Harlan. What'll you do now? Cabin asked. Harlan sighed. Same thing you will, I suppose. Try to live with what's left. He mounted his horse and turned away. Take care of her, Cabin. The sheriff's men rode into the white horizon until they disappeared. As silence settled, Mary let out a shaky laugh. The first real one in months. You're free, she whispered. Cabin looked down at her, snow melting in his hair. We're free. She smiled, tears in her eyes. Then where do we go? He glanced toward the distant line of trees where sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. Somewhere they'll never find us, he said softly. Somewhere quiet. Maybe build another cabin. She laughed again. Another one? He grinned faintly. Only this time, you'll choose it. That night they built their first fire as free souls and not fugitives. Not prisoners of their past, but two people remade by it. The flames crackled gently, reflecting in their eyes. And for the first time, the fire didn't burn. It warmed,